How do your feelings, interests, values, or disposition affect your learning? This video presents the different factors in second language acquisition and learning. Understanding how human beings feel and respond and believe and value is an exceedingly important aspect of a theory of second language acquisition. We turn now to a consideration of specific affective factors in human behavior and how they relate to second language acquisition. We will be tackling these following factors: self-esteem, self-efficacy, inhibition, language ego, risk-taking, anxiety, empathy, sympathy, extroversion, and introversion. Let's talk about self-esteem. Self-esteem is probably the most pervasive aspect of any human behavior. It could easily be claimed that no successful cognitive or affective activity can be carried out without some degree of self-esteem, self-confidence, knowledge of yourself, and self-efficacy, or the belief in your own capabilities to successfully perform that activity. All human beings have a need for emphatic communion, defining oneself and finding acceptance and expressing that self in relation to valued others. Self-esteem is a personal judgment of worthiness that is expressed in the attitudes that individuals hold toward themselves. It is a subjective experience which the individual conveys to others by verbal reports and other overt expressive behavior. There are 3 levels of self-esteem. The first one is general or global self-esteem. It is the general or prevailing assessment one makes of one's own worth over time and across a number of situations. In a sense, it might be analogized to a statistical mean or median level of overall self-appraisal. The second one is situational or specific self-esteem. This refers to one's self-appraisals in particular life situations such as social interaction, work, education, home, or on certain relatively discretely defined traits such as intelligence, communicative ability, athletic ability, or personality traits like gregariousness, empathy, and flexibility. The degree of specific self-esteem a person has may vary depending upon the situation or the trait in question. Lastly, we have task self-esteem. This relates to particular tasks within specific situations. For example, within the educational domain, task self-esteem might refer to one subject matter area. Specific self-esteem might encompass second language acquisition in general, and task self-esteem might appropriately refer to one's self-evaluation of a particular aspect of the process, speaking, writing, a particular class in a second language, or even a special kind of classroom exercise. Adelaide Haid in 1979 studied the effects of the 3 levels of self-esteem on performance of an oral production task by American college students learning French as a foreign language. She found that all 3 levels of self-esteem correlated positively with performance on the oral production measure, with the highest correlation occurring between task self-esteem and performance on oral production measures. Watkins, Biggs, and Regni in 1991, Brodkey and Shore in 1976, and Gardner and Lambert in 1972 all included measures of self-esteem in their studies of success in language learning. Research revealed that self-esteem appears to be an important variable in second language acquisition, particularly in view of cross-cultural factors of second language learning. Let us talk about Weiners Attribution theory and self-efficacy. Attribution theory focuses on how people explain the causes of their own successes and failures. That is according to Bernard Weiner in 1986, 1992, and 2000. Weiner and others, Slavin 2003, Dornier 2001, Williams and Burden 1997, describe attribution theory in terms of 4 explanations for success or failure in achieving a personal objective: ability, effort, perceived difficulty of a task, and luck. 2 of those 4 factors are internal to the learner: ability and effort, and 2 are attributable to external circumstances outside of the learner: task difficulty and luck. If a learner feels he or she is capable of carrying out a given task, in other words, a high sense of self-efficacy, an appropriate degree of effort may be devoted to achieving success. Falling short of one's personal goals may then be attributable to not enough effort expended. But rarely would students with high self-efficacy attribute bad performance to something like bad luck. Conversely, a learner with low self-efficacy may quite easily attribute failure to external factors, a relatively unhealthy psychological attitude to bring to any task. Students with low self-efficacy might also attribute failure to an initial lack of ability. Simply put, this psychological theory says that it is essential for learners to believe in themselves in order to succeed at a set of tasks. One of the most important roles of successful teachers is to facilitate high levels of self-efficacy in their students. Willingness to communicate. A factor related to attribution and self-efficacy, one that has seen a surge of recent interest in the research literature, is the extent to which learners display a willingness to communicate as they tackle a second language. Willingness to communicate, or WTC, may be defined as an underlying continuum representing the predisposition toward or away from communicating, given the choice. Emerging from studies and assertions about language learners' unwillingness to communicate and what we commonly label as shyness, researchers have now been examining the extent to which WTC is a factor, not just in second language acquisition, but one that may have its roots in a learner's first language communication patterns. Let us now tackle inhibition. All human beings, in their understanding of themselves, build sets of defenses to protect the ego. The newborn baby has no concept of its own self. Gradually, it learns to identify a self that is distinct from others. In childhood, the growing degrees of awareness, responding, and valuing begin to create a system of affective traits that individuals identify with themselves. In adolescence, the physical, emotional, and cognitive changes of the pre-teenager and teenager bring on mounting defensive inhibitions to protect a fragile ego, to ward off ideas, experiences, and feelings that threaten to dismantle the organization of values and beliefs on which appraisals of self-esteem have been founded. The process of building defenses continues into adulthood. Some persons, those with higher self-esteem and ego strength, are more able to withstand threats to their existence, and thus their defenses are lower. Those with weaker self-esteem maintain walls of inhibition to protect what is self-perceived to be a weak or fragile ego, or a lack of self-confidence in a situation or task. The research spearheaded by Peter McIntyre and his colleagues suggests that saying a learner has a high WTC must be distinguished from simply describing a learner as extroverted, confident, or risk-taking. One of the key contributors to building WTC, as reported in McIntyre and others, seems to be social support. Teaching implications. Current language teaching methodology strongly supports such communicative techniques such as group and pair work and related interactive activities, all of which can potentially provide social support. Now let us touch on the topic, language ego. The human ego encompasses language ego, or the very personal, egoistic nature of second language acquisition. Meaningful language acquisition involves some degree of identity conflict, as language learners take on a new identity with their newly acquired competence. An adaptive language ego enables learners to lower the inhibitions that may impede success. Ehrman provided further support for the importance of language ego in studies of learners with thin or permeable and thick, not as permeable, ego boundaries. While neither extreme has been found to have necessarily beneficial or damaging effects on success, Ehrman has suggested that the openness, vulnerability, and ambiguity tolerance of those with thin ego boundaries create different pathways to success from those with hard-driving, systematic, perfectionistic, thick ego boundaries. Let's talk about risk-taking. Risk-taking is an important characteristic of successful learning of a second language. Learners have to be able to gamble a bit, to be willing to try out hunches about the language and take the risk of being wrong. Beebe in 1983 described some of the consequences that foster learners' fear of risk-taking. A bad grade in the course, a fail on the exam, a reproach from the teacher, a smirk from a classmate, punishment or embarrassment imposed by oneself, fear of looking ridiculous, fear of frustration coming from a listener's blank look, and others. The classroom antidote to such fears is to create a climate of acceptance that will stimulate confidence and encourage participants to experiment and to discover the target language, allowing themselves to take risks without feeling embarrassed. We will now tackle anxiety. Intricately intertwined with self-esteem, self-efficacy, inhibition, and risk-taking, the construct of anxiety plays a major affective role in second language acquisition. Even though we all know what anxiety is, and we all have experienced feelings of anxiousness, anxiety is still not easy to define in a simple sentence. Spielberg in 1983 defined anxiety as a subjective feeling of tension, apprehension, nervousness, and worry associated with an arousal of the autonomic nervous system. More simply put, anxiety is associated with feelings of uneasiness, frustration, self-doubt, apprehension, or worry. There are two levels of anxiety: trait anxiety and state anxiety. Trait anxiety at a global level is a more permanent predisposition to be anxious. Some people are predictably and generally anxious about many things, while state anxiety at a more momentary or situational level is experienced in relation to some particular event or act. Language anxiety, as it has come to be known, focuses more specifically on the situational nature of state anxiety. Three components of foreign language anxiety have been identified in order to break down the construct into researchable issues. 1. Communication apprehension, arising from learners' inability to adequately express mature thoughts and ideas. 2. Fear of negative social evaluation, arising from a learner's need to make a positive social impression on others. And 3. Test anxiety or apprehension over academic evaluation. There are two kinds of anxiety: debilitative and facilitative anxiety, or harmful and helpful anxiety. Tension is a more neutral concept to describe the possibility of both dysphoric or detrimental and euphoric or beneficial effects in learning a second language. We may be inclined to view anxiety as a negative factor, something to be avoided at all costs. But the notion of facilitative anxiety and euphoric tension is that some concern, some apprehension over a task to be accomplished is a positive factor. Among experienced speakers, the feeling of nervousness before giving a public speech is often a sign of facilitative anxiety, a symptom of just enough tension to get the job done. Several studies have suggested the benefit of facilitative anxiety in learning foreign languages. Research findings. The LCDH, or the Linguistic Coding Deficit Hypothesis, proposed and defended by Sparks and Genschow and their colleagues, is controversial in singling out native language deficits as a potential cause of anxiety. Some researchers point out that a number of other significant sources of anxiety may be present in a language learning situation: a quest for perfection, fear of negative evaluation, and identity conflict. Teaching implications. In your learning or in your experience with students in a foreign language classroom, have you seen evidence of any native language deficiency that could account for anxiety? More important, have you identified other sources that could account for anxiety? If anxieties are debilitative, what approaches and activities can help to alleviate them? Now let's discuss about empathy. Empathy is a process of putting yourself into someone else's shoes, of reaching beyond the self to understand what another person is feeling. Language is one of the primary means of empathizing, but nonverbal communication facilitates the process of empathizing and must not be overlooked. Empathy is not synonymous with sympathy. Empathy implies more possibility of detachment. Sympathy connotes an agreement or harmony between individuals. Empathy is further defined as a process of comprehending in which a temporary fusion of boundaries permits an immediate emotional apprehension of the affective experience of another. Let us talk about extroversion. Extroversion and its counterpart, introversion, are also potentially important factors in the acquisition of a second language. We are prone to think of an extroverted person as a gregarious, life-of-the-party person. Introverts, conversely, are thought of as quiet and reserved, with tendencies toward reclusiveness. Western society values the stereotypical extrovert. Extroversion is the extent to which a person has a deep-seated need to receive ego enhancement, self-esteem, and a sense of wholeness from other people, as opposed to receiving that affirmation within oneself. Extroverts actually need other people in order to feel good, but extroverts are not necessarily loud-mouthed and talkative. On the other hand, introversion is the extent to which a person derives a sense of wholeness and fulfillment apart from a reflection of this self from other people. Contrary to our stereotypes, introverts can have an inner strength of character that extroverts do not have. Extroversion is commonly thought to be related to empathy, but such may not be the case. The extroverted person may actually behave in an extroverted manner in order to protect his or her own ego, with extroverted behavior being symptomatic of defensive barriers and high ego boundaries. At the same time, the introverted, quieter, more reserved person may show high empathy, an intuitive understanding and apprehension of others, and simply be more reserved in the outward and overt expression of empathy.